Certainly been a fun tournament to watch in the little bit that I have, and it's, I think, over delivered on a lot of expectations going into the
Mhm.
tournament. But you were also in an interesting location last week as Juventus crashed out of the Club World Cup because Jonathan David might have been in the building. You and I were texting back and forth during that one. Of course, Jonathan David completing his transfer to Juventus this week. He's going to make a reported 7 million a year, which seems low to me initially, but he finally ends his transfer saga. It seems like this has gone on for 3 or 4 years now. But your initial reactions to Jonathan David, a Juventus player and probably the starting striker for one of the biggest clubs in the world, Brendan?
It's pretty crazy, right? You think about Canada's two best players that play for Bayern Munich and Juventus. That's not something that we could have even imagined a few years ago when there were some stellar players who deserved bigger opportunities and big jumps and maybe to be playing on clubs like that. But it's remarkable for him. He's earned it, obviously. There is the nervous, pessimistic Canadian side of me that's worried about this move ahead of the World Cup and just also not trusting that club and how they deal with great players. A phenomenal example, Dusan Vlahovic, who I think is a very good player, who they've been trying to shop for 2 years and seems to not fit the bill for them, but they can't move him. And he delivers enough to keep his place in the team, sometimes depending on who else is available. So I am a bit worried ahead of this year. However, having said that, he's proven that he can make a jump up. He did it in France. He continued to deliver in France, in so many categories. Only Kylian Mbappe was more productive than him. So I do back him to deliver for Juventus as well. But there is a part of me, and I think we all feel this in Canadian soccer, there's a protectionism that you want them to succeed and be successful. So I am a little nervous there, but I'm very glad that the saga is over. It's a marquee club, which is only better for Canadian soccer in general. So we're just waiting to see if Juventus actually become Canada's favorite Serie A team.
Canada's favorite Serie A team. Well, they're going to have some tough competition. I think Serie A is just a bit too big here. Too many AC Milan, Inter Milan, even Napoli probably the last few years have done themselves some favors. But speaking of the last few years, I think what stood out is maybe at first this move might feel underwhelming just because this Juventus of old has kind of fallen off in a sense that they haven't won a Scudetto in a handful of years because Inter Milan have returned to prominence, AC Milan. And of course, Napoli's resurgence has been great. But this Juventus team is still massive. Like, this is one of the worst squads they've had on paper. And it's still, I think, a top 15 squad in Europe in terms of market value, in terms of the guys they have in the fold. And clearly with some of the names they've continued to be linked with, they want to return towards that top 10. This is still a team that makes the Champions League essentially every year. For as bad as they are, they never really drop out of the top 4, top 5. This is a massive club. Like, in terms of trophies, I know some people in the comments might argue, 36 or is it 38 in terms of Scudettos? No matter what figure you use, either way, it's both the largest in Italy. Like, they're a historic, prolific club. Genuinely, when you look at the history, you're putting it up against the Bayerns, the Manchester Uniteds, the Liverpools, the Reals, the Barças of the world. And that's what we wanted for Jonathan David. We wanted him to make a step up, and this is about as big of a step up that it is. At the same time, they have some big goals. They haven't been good enough in Champions League in recent years, and even just in their history, 2 Champions League isn't good enough for a club of that stature. And the fact they haven't been past the quarterfinals since they reached the final almost a decade ago. But I like that because that gives Jonathan David and his teammates a target, something to achieve, something to chase, along with, of course, bringing the Scudetto back to Turin. So in terms of the grandeur, I think that's something that we always get caught up in recency the last few years, but I love that historically he's joining a true giant.
And with Juventus as well, they really treated this signing, on social and through all of their comms work, as a marquee signing. And I don't know whether that necessarily would have been the case if he had made a move to another one of the clubs that was heavily linked with him. I think it would have been the case with Napoli and how confident it looked that move was going to happen. But this was a marquee signing for Juventus and kind of their defining signing of the summer. And it's not clear where he's going to fit in this team either, because you mentioned Vlahovic, he's still there. They've been linked with guys like Osimhen, and Napoli also linked with Osimhen and other players. And so there's not really a defined role yet for Jonathan David. We all think given the money, he's probably going to be their starting striker, but given that he likes to drop back a little bit, maybe he plays more of a pseudo number 10. Alex, where do you see him fitting in Igor Tudor's system at Juve?
Yeah, I think this is an underrated factor. Is the system he's joining fits him quite well. I love that it's a 3-4-2-1, just because immediately I see three spots to start. And if you're looking at most clubs in the world, if it's a 4-2-3-1, it's one, maybe two spots. There's rarely any other teams in the elites that play two strikers. Napoli would have been an exception. I don't know if they would have kept doing it, but they were playing with two. So I like that immediately he has options. If they bring in an Osimhen, if a Vlahovic for whatever reason stays, although it looks just so unlikely at this stage, Jonathan David doesn't have to be the number 9 right away. He can be flexible. He can fit in. They've got a lot of attacking talent. That's the reality of playing at a big club like Juventus. You're going to have competition. You got, Conceição, what a player he is, Chico Conceição. You've got, some other incredible attackers within that mix. Kenan Yildiz, what a player he is. That's going to be fun to watch Jonathan David potentially get on the end of some of his passes and link up with him. But I see him leading the line just because Tudor wants flexibility from his strikers. He wants them to be able to drop deep and also run in behind. But I do think there's a world where it might depend on opponents. Some games they might need a striker that stretches a bit more, and David play underneath, which makes sense why they're looking at Osimhen, why they're looking to bring back Kolomwani, maybe more of those true running behind link strikers. So I think Jonathan David's going to start from day one just because there's so many places to put him, and I think it's going to be up to preseason to decide which of those roles fits him the best.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think that that's what makes him so versatile, and that's what justifies the money. I don't know if there's anything that justifies $12.5 million in extras, which supposedly is the agent fees and the signing bonus. And hey, if 50%, 60% of that is a signing bonus to Jonathan David, I've got no problem with that. But I think that it's just the way that club moves and how quickly they can turn their back on signings that they seem to rate when they brought them in makes me a little nervous. To Ben's point, they gave him the star treatment. I disagree, Ben, that it's a surprise or that some other clubs wouldn't have done that way, because I think if Manchester United got him, if Arsenal had got him, they would have treated it like a win, like a celebration, because they've beaten other teams to it. And I don't think their exit to Real Madrid on that day completely sealed the deal and the timing for signing Jonathan David. But the reality is Juventus's Club World Cup ended because they couldn't score enough goals. And they seem broken in attack, largely. They were very good defensively. They frustrated Real Madrid. That's obviously one game in the heat and humidity of Miami, which I think you have to put an asterisk next to kind of any of these performances. But in terms of how far Juventus are off of the other teams in Italy, obviously Napoli, but AC Milan and Inter Milan, they can't score. So he's brought in here to fix that problem. And whether he does that as a number 9 playing at the top alone, or whether he ends up playing in some number 10 role, I think that there's a phenomenal setup and possibility for him and Vlahovic to be an exceptional duo, with David playing a little behind him, and they both would benefit from certainly creating goals together, but both put their names on the score sheet. But we'll have to see how it plays out. It's for me, Juventus are definitely the team in Italy now to pay the most attention to. So I understand that not all Canadians will get in on that, because there are some very deep Serie A allegiances, but I do think all Canadians should be paying attention to the Bianconeri.
Was it disappointing, Brendan, that it does end up being Juventus considering some of the other clubs? And I know on the show we've talked about the potential of a Canadian move to the Premier League and how that would change the sport in this country. Is Serie A little bit underwhelming for Jonathan David?
It's a great question, and it's I think it's very debatable. To me, the Serie A is not as big as it used to be. The Serie A is not as big as the Premier League. However, Juventus are one of the biggest clubs in the world. They are still one of the most recognizable clubs in the world. And much like Alphonso Davies playing at Bayern Munich, that means a lot. He will star in the Champions League. He will be the front and the face of a lot of marketing and advertising, again, for one of the biggest clubs around. That will hopefully increase his opportunities in Canada as well. That doesn't happen when you are on a Lille. That doesn't happen when you are on a Union Saint-Gilloise. That may not happen if you're on an Aston Villa, even. I am sad that we're in this period here where the Canadian players in the Premier League are Daniel Jebbison, who hasn't cracked, Bournemouth's starting 11. He's not a regular there. He's not a regular for Canada. I would like to see Canada's best players playing in the Premier League, but I'm biased. I do think that probably by the time the World Cup rolls around, Alistair Johnson will be playing in the Premier League, but maybe not at one of the big clubs. The one that I thought was most realistic, but equally the most terrifying, was Jonathan David to Manchester United. I thought that they would have paid whatever David's camp wanted. But as we've seen so many players go there with, an upswing and potential and just flounder, I was worried about that. So I think overall this is pretty good. I still think, I know we debated this, Alex, that his most successful opportunity, honestly, I think would have been at PSG. But the success that they've had over the last little bit, if I'm Luis Enrique and the Qatari Sports Group, I'm not really messing with that too much. So I wouldn't go and get someone who could be a marquee star elsewhere. So overall, I'm happy with Juventus in the end.
Well, I don't know if this would make sense, but I feel like for me, the best fit in terms of like brand, in terms of opportunity, would have been Barcelona. I think that's safe to say. I think the best tactical fit, just in terms of system club, I think would have been Arsenal. Like, I just find it dumbfounding that Arsenal did not go after him on a free when they're trying to pay 80 million for Gyökeres, and I like Gyökeres. I think that could be a good move. And they've been looking at Šeško. I just feel like David would fit perfectly in Arteta's system. What's nice with Juventus, you kind of get best of both worlds. You get a similar tactical fit to what Arsenal would have given him, but you also give the similar prestige to a Barcelona, where Juventus is kind of in that similar heavyweight category. So for what it's worth, I think, again, now that we've had time to percolate and really look at what this Juventus move brings, there's a lot of underrated commercial opportunities. Like, for example, if you can watch the Premier League in Canada, you can watch Serie A because it's all on Fubo. So all of a sudden, there's no accessibility questions in terms of seeing Jonathan David. People are going to have this access. Granted, Ligue 1 was also on Fubo, so for them it was less accessibility and more excuses and more whatever reasons. But Serie A is on genuinely at good times for even here out on the West Coast. Like, that's one thing with Ligue 1. Lille played a lot of 4 a.m. Pacific time games, which wasn't always easy. Serie A, they always put the big teams on at like noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. That helps. And of course, Champions League. Like, it helps to know that Juventus almost every year, like, you're going to get those Tuesday, Wednesday night primetime Juventus. Like, that first Juventus versus like Real Madrid, whoever they get drawn in from the pot one, like, that's going to be must-watch TV.
Certainly exciting to see this whole saga come to an end after the years that we've had with Jonathan David moving here and there and not signing anywhere. I remember the first report I saw of him from Juventus, I was like, well, I'll believe it when he actually signs, right? You took everything with a grain of salt.
He was linked to Inter when he was at Ghent still. Like, this has been a long time coming.
You take everything with a grain of salt until he was actually, wearing the shirt and holding the shirt and signing the contract and all of that. But fast forward to Christmas. What does success look like for Jonathan David at Juventus, Brendan?
That's a great question. I would say, I'm not going to put like a number on the goal total. Is it 10 already at Christmas? But I think a regular spot in the squad, I think, would be success. Where we're not looking at it as is Jonathan David going to keep his place, or can he get back in? But if he's made himself a regular, to me, I think that's a big success. And whether that's with him having 14 goal contributions and only 6 goals scored, or less, 10 goal contributions and a handful of goals scored, if he's made himself a regular, Alex, I think that's a successful first half of the season, the debut season, a brand new league for a massive club.
Yeah, I was going to say, versatility can be both a huge asset for a player and it can be a huge hindrance. What I would say is, you don't want, like, Weston McKennie's the perfect example. His versatility has allowed him to thrive at Juventus, but it also has hurt him at times where coaches can almost use him like, oh, you're a wing back now, you're this, you're that. And you wonder what McKennie could have from that consistency. So for me, what I want by Christmas is Jonathan David to have a defined role as a starter in a clear position, that he's not getting shuttled all over the squad, in and out, sometimes a starter, sometimes a sub, and for his versatility to use against him. I want it to be clear that either he's the number 10 or one of the number 10s in that system, or he's the number 9, and that it's clear he's starting in Champions League, he's playing in Serie A. Like you mentioned, the output, you never know with new signings. It might take a little bit to come, maybe it'll flow right away. And then from there, that's encouraging, because at the end of the day, we want him as fit and ready as possible for the World Cup. So by next year, then maybe we can start to look at output and actual minutes. But I think by Christmas, that's plenty of time for him to get settled, hit the ground running, so that he can lay the runway potentially for a 15, 20 goal season in all competitions. I don't think that's too crazy because we have to remember Juventus are playing, Coppa Italia, Champions League with the extra games, Serie A. I don't know if they're in the Super Cup because that format's very weird. Like, there's enough games for there, I think, for Jonathan David to at least get 15. That feels like a conservative estimate.
15, not 20. You said
15 to 20, but like 15 the minimum. Like 15 is the bar of, okay, we're in a good season, good debut season.
Yeah.